A suspected Chinese spy balloon has been flying over the United States. According to U.S. defense officials, the balloon floated into the U.S. airspace a couple of days ago, but American intelligence has been tracking it well before that. The balloon is believed to have flown over northwest United States, where there are sensitive air bases and nuclear missiles in underground silos. Fighter jets were flown to examine the balloon while it was flying above Montana. As per the Pentagon, the balloon is currently traveling at an altitude well above commercial air traffic and does not pose any military or physical threat to people on the ground. Spy balloons were first used back in the 1860s. What exactly are these spy balloons and why are they used far more than satellites are for espionage purposes? It typically involves a camera suspended beneath a balloon that floats above a given area thanks to wind currents. The equipment attached to the balloons could even include radar and solar power. Balloons typically operate at 24,000 to 37,000 meters. That is well above the commercial airlines, which almost never fly more than 12,000 meters in altitude. So why are they used instead of satellites? While they don't offer the same level of surveillance as satellites do, they are easier to retrieve, they are much cheaper to launch. The balloons can also scan more territory from a lower altitude and spend more time over a given area because they move far more slowly than satellites do. One of the most notable examples of spy balloon usage was by the Soviet Union during the Cold War. The Soviets attached cameras to spy balloons to keep tabs on Western military activities and installations. This led to countermeasures by the West, including efforts to shoot down these balloons or disrupt their signals. In 2010, the United States military detected a high-altitude balloon which was equipped with cameras and other surveillance equipment near its base in Okinawa in Japan. It is believed that the balloon was launched by the Chinese military and it was being used for espionage purposes. And then again in 2014, a Chinese military unit reportedly launched a high-altitude balloon near the Pacific island of Guam. The incident sparked tensions between Washington and Beijing. It also raised concerns about Chinese military activities close to U.S. military bases. Now, China has said that the balloon was a civilian airship that was used for research that blew off course. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has insisted that China will not violate any international law.
中国是负责任的国家，一贯严格遵守国际法，无意侵犯任何主权国家的领土和领空。关于这个气球的问题，刚刚我已经讲了，我们正在了解核实情况，希望双方能够共同冷静谨慎处理。
And we're getting breaking news in this regard. According to Bloomberg News, the Biden administration has decided to postpone Secretary of State Antony Blinken's upcoming visit to Beijing. This is after the Chinese surveillance balloon was detected over Montana. Sanjay Suri has more details on this. Sanjay, this would arguably be the first time that a balloon has curtailed a diplomatic visit.
Rather odd happenings in the sky above the United States, of course. And as you say, the Chinese have said that this was a meteorological data gathering balloon that somehow blew off course. The question is, how will we ever know? Are the Chinese waiting for the winds to blow it back over China, for then China to retrieve it onto the ground and collect data about the weather? Or is it the U.S. suspicions that are right? And that suspicion, of course, primarily is that this is a spy balloon. This is not a small balloon. We are told it's the size of about 3 buses. It certainly carries a lot of data on board. But in this current spat between China and the U.S. over exactly what kind of balloon this is, it's hard to see how we will get to a final determination what's going to happen to it. Of course, there are demands to shoot it down, led predictably by Donald Trump, rather fond of shorthand and dramatic measures. But unless that happens, unless we come to some sort of a conclusion, and that question really is uncertain. It is, in fact, if you like, a question that is up in the air.
All right, it literally is up in the air. Sanjay, thanks for that. Let me go across also to CNN correspondent Alex Marqua, who's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Alex, first things first, reports, including this one that I cited a moment ago from Bloomberg News, suggesting that the Biden administration has decided to postpone Secretary of State Antony Blinken's upcoming visit to Beijing. What are you hearing?
Yeah, well, we have now confirmed this. CNN is reporting that Blinken is postponing his trip to Beijing that was due to take place next week. This was just confirmed by State Department officials just moments ago. We had a briefing call with them. They said that this Chinese balloon that is now over American airspace is a clear violation of American sovereignty, and that it would not be constructive at this time to go forward with this meeting. This meeting due to take place in just a couple of days. Secretary Blinken was due to leave very soon in order to get to Beijing. This was going to be the highest level meeting of a Biden administration official in China since President Biden came into office, following President Biden's meeting with Xi Jinping at the G20 in Bali back in November. Now this meeting is off, but they are saying it is postponed. It has not been canceled. They do plan to put this meeting back on the table, reschedule it when the conditions are right. But when asked by CNN what those conditions would look like, they were not very specific. The Pentagon has said very clearly that this is not the first time that Chinese surveillance and intelligence balloons have flown over the United States. What's different in this case is that it appears to be loitering for a longer period of time, but more importantly, that this is happening, as the State Department has said, on the eve of this very important trip by Secretary Blinken to Beijing. So the fact that this is happening right now raised questions immediately as to whether Secretary Blinken would actually go, and now we know that that trip has been postponed. We know that urgent and angry messages have been sent to Beijing, both through the highest-ranking Chinese officials here at the embassy in Washington and through the U.S. Embassy in Beijing.
And Alex, what are the options before U.S. officials at this point of time vis-a-vis this balloon? Is shooting down the balloon one of those options? Already we're seeing former President Donald Trump saying shoot the balloon down, and I'm sure so are many other Republican supporters of his.
Yeah, we are hearing a lot of people saying that they wish that was the course of action that President Biden was taking. I've spoken with fighter jet pilots who would tell you that it's very simple to shoot this thing down. President Biden did get a briefing in which he asked for military options. He was told by top military officials that it was not a good idea to shoot this balloon down because of the potential damage that could be done to people and property on the ground. The Pentagon believes this is not currently a threat to the American population, to Homeland Security, and they say that they have taken steps to limit the surveillance and intelligence gathering capabilities of this balloon. Now, as you've seen, this balloon has floated over Montana, which is quite sparsely populated. And so we've heard some people, including several Republicans, saying, why not just shoot it down where there is barely anyone out there? But the administration is arguing that for the potential of that damage of a falling craft, while right now they say it is not posing any danger, but it is just remarkable to think that right now, as we speak, there is this Chinese spy balloon, according to the Pentagon, floating over American airspace.
All right, Alex Marqua, we'll leave it at that. Thanks very much for joining us live from Washington, D.C. for us. Meanwhile, let's open this up to our guests. Einar Tangen is a political affairs commentator. He's joining us live from Beijing. And Glenn Clark is a former CIA officer. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Einar, I know, I can't think of another time when a senior diplomatic official canceled his trip bases a balloon sort of parading into American airspace. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people in Beijing who are looking at this as half tragic, half comic. But the fact is that this is, at least the way the American officials see it, the way Pentagon officials have been briefing, this is a serious violation of American airspace.
Well, as we all know, a balloon is something that is blown by the winds and is not controllable. So this idea that somehow the Chinese have as you put it, a balloon the size of 3 buses and they're able to maneuver it wherever they want, highly improbable. And the fact is, this is not the Cold War of Russia and the United States. The accuracy of the telescopes and these satellites going around the world is very, very precise. They don't need these balloons. So, from Beijing's point of view, they have an errant civilian balloon that's going around. You have speculation on behalf. Easiest way to do this is, as you pointed out, why not shoot it down over Montana? They might kill a buffalo or 2. That would be about it. And quite frankly, they could settle the issue of whether this was a civilian or a military craft. So at this juncture, it just seems that this is being overblown as an excuse to cancel Biden's visit to China.
Glenn Carl,
Blinken.
Blinken. Why is the United States so reluctant to shoot it down? Because, all right, we'll try and go across to Glenn Carl. There are various considerations you have to take into account before making that decision. One is, of course, is it materially relevant to shoot it down? Is the damage that's being done by this balloon so grave that U.S. officials have no other option but to shoot it down? Also, we don't know what's on board that balloon. It is possible that there could be destructive material on board that balloon, which could pose a danger to folks on the ground. Let's try and see if we can go back to Glenn Carl, because I want to try and understand, what are the considerations that security officials take into account before making that decision whether or not to shoot such a thing down. Is it simply just utility, or is it also the danger it may pose if it is shot down? Because if it's clearly dangerous enough to call off a diplomatic visit, then it's dangerous enough to be floating in the air over American airspace.
Was that to me? I'm
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, that was to you, Mr. Carl, yeah.
Thanks. Well, no, I think we're in a pretty classic diplomatic intelligence dance, and to shoot it down would be an escalation. Everyone knows that espionage occurs. Most countries do it. Here, there's a long history of Chinese intelligence balloons. They aren't the only ones to use them, but they have been caught here red-handed, if that's the appropriate metaphor to use with regard to a balloon. So the classic response is to diplomatically say, we've caught you out. You better stop. And then the response will be, as it has been, there's a misunderstanding. This is a weather balloon that has strayed. Mm-hmm. And then usually both parties will back off. The perpetrator will tend to back off for a time. To shoot it down would escalate matters, but if China were to continue sending uncontrolled balloons over the United States, then probably the United States would respond. But at present, it's a classic diplomatic intelligence dance playing out traditionally.
But how did it make its way all the way from China through many of the countries that it had to traverse, including Canada, to get to U.S. airspace, as it were?
Well, this is an interesting point. I'm hardly an expert on the slipstream on aviation or on balloons. However, there is literally a over 100-year history of using balloons for intelligence. As you pointed out, by the way, it's about the best summary of the use of balloons for intelligence that I've heard from any source that you gave. In World War II, Japan sent them by using prevailing wind currents. Japan's intent during World War II was to drop bombs. This is not the case with this balloon. What is notable to me is that the Chinese balloons do appear to be controlled, at least to some extent. They have flown over Guam, which is not a large target, and now over the United States, specifically over sensitive sites. So they appear to have some means of controlling and guiding them, as opposed to just tossing them up into the slipstream.
Aina Tangent, what's the view in Beijing now that this visit itself has been called off, and we haven't had such a high-level diplomatic visit to Beijing for a number of years now, certainly not since the onset of COVID. And the feeling was, after Joe Biden and Xi Jinping met at the G20 in Bali a few months ago, that there was going to be a degree of normalcy back into the relationship. Now with this episode and the visit being cancelled in the background of this episode, are we back to blowing hot and blowing cold between China and the United States?
Well, let's take a look at that statement. A couple of days ago, a four-star U.S. general predicted that there would be a war in 2025. Since 2020, the U.S. has been reforming its Naval Marine Corps to fight in islands directly at China, mentioning China as an adversary. You've also had all of the banning of Huawei, the instigation of trying to get both Japan and South Korea to not only join into the situation in Ukraine, but also to come together into the Quad. come together in an alliance against China. So, this idea that somehow the provocation is on China's side is kind of ridiculous. This balloon theory that you can't see a balloon that's the size of 3 buses, which it clearly is visible to people as the pictures you are showing are, that it could be stealthily sent into the U.S. is kind of nonsense. And the idea that you need these balloons in order to gather information is also nonsense. These satellites are not 100 years old. They're up to date, and they can tell you how many shoelaces you have on your shoes. So it's not credible. I can understand that Washington wants to spin this as some sort of diplomatic incident, but if they were serious about it, they have 2 options. One, they can disable it through electronic countermeasures that would prevent any kind of signal from getting out, or they could shoot it down. But they run the risk, if they shoot it down, of discovering that it is in fact a civilian weather balloon, and then they would have egg on their faces and be very embarrassed.
All right, we'll leave it at that. We'll see how this story plays itself out. Like I said in my opening comments, it's not the first time that such balloons have been used for espionage purposes. China says this has nothing to do with espionage. It's just a civilian, a research balloon that was looking at weather patterns. The United States is not buying that. For whatever reason, this has become such a serious incident that a high-level diplomatic visit that was supposed to happen in a couple of days from now has been called off. Even if the U.S. doesn't say it's because of this reason, it's clear that in the backdrop of this balloon incident, that is having a big bearing on why that visit was called off. We'll see how the story plays out. In the meanwhile, if you've been tuned in, thanks very much. I'm Zaka Jacob. I'll see you again Monday night, same time.